Hey, what's going on, guys? Aarava here, and welcome back to another video on F1 testing. This one for week number 2. I might be talking a lot quieter than usual as I'm actually losing my voice at the moment, so I'm going to try and keep the volume and the strain on my voice to a minimum, but let's get into this then. We're going to start off with the first major thing, and the thing that excited me the most as well, and I'm guessing also you guys as well, as, throughout this second testing, obviously a lot more sun. The teams were actually able to run a lot more, and it's been a kind of case of the paddock trying to suss out if Red Bull are close enough this year for a title challenge, if they're going to be the actual elusive third fight, alongside Ferrari and Merc. And, they've had some decent pace in terms of one laps. I'm not going to go too much into pace because I'm going to leave that for the podcast for next week when we discuss the entire testing overall. But in terms of aero bits, what Red Bull have done this week, have brought this entire long winglet kind of a device to attach on from the chassis, the main part of the chassis, all the way to the actual end plates of the side pod area, and it kind of mimics almost the style Williams have gone with. And obviously Williams pretty much copied the style Mercedes did. Now Mercedes is more of a winglet that literally is coming from the chassis, whereas with Williams and Red Bull's winglet, it actually conjoins onto the barge board here. You can see that is the actual barge board. That's the behind of the barge board. You can't really see it's angled in a certain way, so it just kind of looks with the shadow, just looks black. But the winglet connects to the barge board and extends out and then connects to the end plates on the edge of the side pod area. And they've got these small little slits here. Those slits actually line up with the slot gaps in the floor, as there's actually a technical rule in the regulations where from underneath, when you look at underneath of the floor, it has to be a solid surface and there can't be any kind of double layered hole when you look from underneath of the car. So they do these slits to kind of line up with the slot gaps they've got in the floor to kind of keep that ruling in check. But yeah, really elegant winglet coming off from the barge board to hit the end plates of the side pod. That's going to help not only funnel air to where they need it, either into the inlets or to the top winglet you can see here from this side of the car and onto the right side as well, and angle it either sideways to this entire chunky area of space, which obviously we know the Red Bull has with very slim side pods. They have a lot of air that can just pass straight through, and so with this winglet they can do a lot more with that. Also, when you've got these little kinks here and there, that's going to allow a little bit of vortex to be made, and that mixing of the air, and once again that encouraging of the mixing of the air is going to hopefully allow the air to be actually a lot smoother as it kind of goes towards the rear end of the car. And obviously all of it is really pretty much to go to the rear end of the car. Obviously this kind of inward part, perhaps some of it might funnel into the actual small tiny inlet, which may be a solution they need. Red Bull, that might have been an issue maybe they did in week 1 with the CFD with the FlowViz paint testing, I should say. Maybe they just found maybe they wanted a little bit more air into the inlet, so part of this might be sculpted in a way to send more air into the inlet to help the cooling side. But obviously a lot of it will just be actually really kind of manipulating airflow as it comes through. If it's not hitting the barge board already, or if it's not going to hit the end plates of the side pods, it's going to hit this winglet now, which is pretty much, if we move on to a side picture, you can see pretty much it's at a height on the car where there weren't any winglets there before, and so any air that's just kind of traveling free stream that's gone through the suspension arms from the right hand side of the picture, any air that's, it would have just gone straight through these tiny slot gaps here in the barge board you can see, and that would have just gone straight through into either this area of the side pod, or as I said, into the inlet, or just above the side pod on the top surface. Now they can manipulate that air, and you can see here from this angle it's a bit of a scoop turn, so that almost definitely does suggest that with this scoop turn nature, this kind of more curved edge, they are trying to chuck air a little bit more upwards into the inlet perhaps, and then also to hit the winglet that comes across the side pod top surface. And then this entire area will definitely most likely be, basically it's going to be the exact same height obviously as this extending crash structure part, which we already mentioned from the launch of the Red Bull car. They've gone with a very different concept of their side pod pretty much starts around here-ish, and they've got the crash structure which every team mandatorily has to have there. They've actually got it outside of the side pod itself, almost like an exoskeleton. And so definitely I think they've lined the heights up, so it's almost like the same kind of concept as what McLaren's funky rear suspension has. It's at the same height as the uprights they've got along the car, so you can kind of almost picture the air kind of bouncing from one surface to the other, and that's a really good way they can get the airflow moving and have it as smooth as possible as it moves downstream towards that diffuser area of the car. Speaking of McLaren, here's just a better picture from last week compared, just a much more clearer picture of that very weird rear suspension, which today also there were some Paddock insiders saying that if McLaren, if the concept works and they can, get that car working, obviously they still had a few teething issues here and there with the car still, but away from that, if they can just get some reliable running and they can see the data is exactly what they want and they can get it to work and there's no issues with reliability on the suspension arm and the way they've sculpted it, and if it gives them just that little edge of aerodynamic performance. The Paddock insiders, talking to other teams, journalists talking to other teams, they've said that it's going to be actually quite difficult for other teams to copy this rear suspension. So if it does indeed give a performance advantage, we're talking minimal stuff, but still enough to maybe warrant looking into it for other teams. It's going to be a while for teams to maybe actually to recreate this. So McLaren, for once, away from all the issues with reliability and still, not having an ideal testing week 2, they may have a little bit of step ahead of the rest of the teams in this area, in this particular area of the car. Obviously, the rest of the car is up for debate, but this particular area, they might have a march on the other teams. Also, at the same time, it has already been said, and McLaren said it themselves before the car even launched, that they're going to be bringing a huge raft of upgrades for Australia. So the car we see in testing right now, not a lot has actually changed too much on the car, to be honest, on the McLaren side. And I think that's because they genuinely actually just planned a lot of stuff for Australia, and they've just turned up to this testing session in a bid to kind of just understand where the air is going right now with their base car and kind of maybe validate the upgrades they're going to be bringing for Australia, pretty much. And that's the same sort of thing that Force India really did. Force India have admitted that their car is very, very basic and very much an evolution of last year with not many new bits on, because they want to get a foundation that's good, and then they want to be able to rapidly chuck on upgrades from Australia onwards rather than bring experiment ones to testing. But speaking about McLaren's reliability woes, obviously they had some issues with the exhaust clipping, and they actually installed these different holes to allow a bit more cooling to the actual exhaust area in the engine side, which is a little bit of a bodge job, and I would assume that by Australia they'll be redesigning that a little bit. But just little things like that is it's not looking great for McLaren in terms of it's almost like they've forgotten how to they've been so caught up on engine issues with Honda in the last 3 years. They've almost just forgotten the basics and kind of, just not, making a car that's too constrained on itself and, breaks itself apart. So, yeah, little holes there to make, which were quite interesting to see and funny to see in a way to kind of rectify that issue. And then they went with well, it's not really a T-wing per se, but a kind of a monkey seat, if you will, but it's not a monkey seat because they're allowed to do that. It comes off the upright of the rear wing. But this is, remember, where a monkey seat would be. And so they're trying their best to get upwash to the underside of the rear wing to allow that upwash to create a better pressure differential on the rear wing to make that entire rear wing work a lot better. And obviously that's been a big talking point, especially for Renault, the Works Renault team, and we'll get onto that right now because they actually did an update to their car that relates to that exhaust blowing that we talked about last week in the testing video. So you mentioned in last week's testing video, if you haven't seen that, by the way, I do recommend you go see that to kind of get caught up if you're new around here, and do get subscribed for more videos maybe in the future like this. So Renault have been more than any other team really have been blowing their exhaust gases, or trying to blow their exhaust gases, to the underside of the rear wing. Now the way they do this is the regulations allow for 5 degrees of the tailpipe, these the main tailpipe and the 2 wastegates, to be angled 5 degrees upwards, and Renault have taken that to the maximum 5 degrees. Red Bull, if you look at the rear end, and also McLaren, their tailpipes are also angled more upwards than any Mercedes powered cars or Ferrari powered cars, but Renault, the Works team, have taken the full hog of 5 degrees upwards, and what they're trying to do is blow hot air to the underside of the rear wing and create a blown rear wing. Now, it's nothing like the blown diffusers we saw of 2011. It's going to be nothing like that in terms of performance gain. That was literally almost like traction control in a way in terms of the amount of downforce they could create, literally by drivers getting on throttle mid-corner. We always talked about in the past about, Vettel getting throttle middle corner, and that would actually do the counteract of what you would think, because he was going mid-throttle with the blown diffuser. That would actually blow hot air gas through the diffuser and give him more downforce mid-corner, but this isn't anything like that. So I digress, getting away from that. This isn't anything like that, but it's still going to be a small enough gain and worthwhile that Renault at least think that it's worthwhile doing. And actually what they've done is here now, they put on a more heat-resistive material on the underside flap here, because because of those hot gases, obviously the hot exhaust gases coming out of the engine. So they put this resistant material. You can see it's already still doing some work on the middle, especially, and then around the sides, just burning it a little bit. And so trying to protect that area. So it kind of shows their commitment to the blown area. And when interviews with the Renault team principal, I think some of the engineers as well, they're mentioning that it won't be difficult for Red Bull and McLaren to implement that, or any other teams, but they were specifically talking about Red Bull and McLaren, obviously, as they're powered by Renault. It's not something difficult to do. You just need to, literally move the engine. You need to move the exhaust 5 degrees upwards, angle that differently. Maybe that changes a little bit of your bodywork packaging, but it's not like a crucial, fundamental thing you're changing about the car. You're just slightly angling the tailpipe higher. So I don't know. I wouldn't be too surprised if Red Bull, McLaren rocked up with the full 5 degrees at some point later on in the season, but Renault going full steam ahead with this concept. And obviously they're doing this because of the lack of the monkey seat, which was a really key area, because the monkey seat was literally a winglet that was housed around the exit of the exhaust that literally guided the exhaust gases upwards and allowed an upwash on the rear wing. Now we move to Williams. This isn't much of an update, really just kind of showing you what I meant with the Red Bull style. Red Bull kind of gone with that concept of adding the winglet to the barge wall. Williams have kind of gone half and half. It's kind of almost like Mercedes, but at the same time, it's like Red Bull's in a way, where Mercedes, like Williams, it starts on the actual chassis cockpit area itself, but Mercedes winglet almost kind of just floats and hangs in the center point of the inlet, whereas Williams connected to the barge board, or to the end plate, I should say, of the side pod, and that's pretty much what Red Bull have done. But Red Bull's also connects to their barge board. Their barge board extends a lot higher, and it connects around here, and then connects to their outward one. But you can see the kind of general trend, and I wouldn't be surprised if other teams then start to copy that, and that's all in a bid. You can see the way it's twisted and warped, specific ways to chuck it either into the inlet or to the top to create vortices on the top of the side pod, or moving it to the outside, where obviously they have the undercut of the side pod and then all these end plates on the side pod as well, to try and channel it towards the rear end of that car. And all of that's actually really well illustrated in this Flovis paint on the Toro Rosso. You can see it's not amazingly clear, because obviously it's Flovis paint that's started to dry off clearly as the car's in the pit lane. But you can see how the air is moving. It hits these winglets and gets sputtered off towards the inlet, and you can see it going into the inlet. And then any air that passes through these cuts is passed through or goes swooping down the rest of the barge wall, and then gets chucked onto the floor area itself. And you can see really nicely here, this is exactly where the kind of air is, it's curving down, and it's pretty much where the boundary layer of the actual winglet itself, and the air starts to go upwards and kind of get chucked. Either it's going to go, just kind of more straightish, or kind of get moved downwards towards this area of the actual side pod kind of inlet structure. But really nice visualization, kind of in a simpler way, of you seeing what's actually happening, rather than, kind of just taking the kind of word for it and kind of just, trying to picture it in your own head. The flow of his paint gives you a little bit of an indicator. Obviously, it's not amazingly clear, but you can kind of see the general gist of everything. And staying with Toro Rosso just for a second, this wasn't anything new from this week, but it was something that I forgot to mention in testing week 1, was that Toro Rosso appear to be the only team, I think at the moment to my knowledge, that have a little winglet underneath their halo. So they have the fairing on the top, but they also have a little winglet on the underside pretty much, and that will be also guiding air. The way it's curved down will be making sure that air that goes through and is met here at the underside of the halo is going to be a bit more useful than it would be just being turbulent air kind of swirling around. They're going to try and push it towards the inlets, I'm assuming, that they've got for the engine itself. Here we've got a really nice look of the Renault car now, the barge board area. Obviously, they got a lot more complicated since they arrived at testing, and you can see definitely now, compared to the pictures we saw, a lot more complex. It's no longer just an upright, if you follow my mouse, that on the rendering when they launched the car, it was pretty much an upright that just had a square, and that was it. And now they've got this actual chiseled multi-array, slot gaps going on to allow the air to pass through, coupled with all these streams that we saw before, the teeth as well, all letting air through, obviously cutting drag there and passing air through, also on the underside of the floor itself as well, all channeling it towards the rear end of the car. And you can see a comparison, actually, it's very, very different in this area of the car, from Renault to Ferrari. Ferrari opting for a bit more of a larger structure to the barge board, and a bit more higher up and a lot more forward of the car itself. Obviously, Ferrari gone for a different philosophy. They don't have any winglets here. Of course, they have the more unique, very weird weird system they've gone with on the side pod with the winglets on the right hand side. But you can see finer details on the floor, just these small little uprights trying to tweak air, and the way it's kind of twisted and chiseled is going to send air either side, so either to the left over here, but the chisel is going to allow air to maybe go to this towards this scoop turn. And then they've got what looks to be, I think this is a sensor. I might be wrong on that, but it looks like a sensor, I think. And so they're trying to get an idea perhaps of air coming through here, but obviously naturally the air would go through and then towards the floor, and then also be hitting this end plate on the side pod. Finally, look at Mercedes, this snowplow cape they've had obviously for a long while now, but they've just made a few minor tweaks to the entry point. You can see now it's actually kind of more like a, I don't know, I want to say like a drooping eyebrow almost off the side nose, and so the entry point's a little bit different in terms of the angle of the air that's going to come in, and the way they've gone about that in terms of changing it from last week. And then you've got also the inlet itself for the S duct. And finally, just a little caveat of adding on, this keel probe that they've got of a multiple array of sensors behind the front tire, just kind of showing off, like I mentioned and kept on mentioning a lot of times in the launch videos, about how important the airflow coming off the front tire is so important in terms of trying to neaten that up, trying to smoothen it out with the flow coming off the front wing, coming off the barge wall as well, trying to get that air mixing as it comes off, and they're trying to get an idea of how well a job they're doing, because obviously they'll have CFD simulations that will show them what in theory is happening, but this is a way for them to actually test that and validate all of that. So even the top teams have to validate their CFD findings, because you're never going to be completely right, and you might find better simulation ways to make things more accurate, and you need to recalibrate and kind of verify that everything's working the way it should do. And then actually quickly, I forgot, the Toro Rosso actually also added a lower T-wing finally, so they've got this kind of bent upwards instead. Mercedes and Ferrari have opted for a more bending down T-wing, but Toro Rosso kind of start their T-wing a little bit lower, just above the exhaust housing then, and so it cranks up. And then I wouldn't be surprised if later on they add end plates, and the teams always try and subtly just add a few more elements to these T-wings if they can see a better performance of upwashing. But that is pretty much going to be the end of the video, guys. So a bit of a shorter one, I think, hopefully, compared to last week. As this week really for teams, it was more about in terms of the coverage of the testing, at least to my knowledge. It was a lot of teams, they didn't bring a huge amount of stuff. It was more about just getting the laps down, getting the kind of running they wanted on the longest stints, and there hasn't been a huge flurry of updates, maybe like we saw last year. Last year was very different, obviously with the new regs. There's so much time to find, whereas now it's very kind of fine-tuning stuff. But the thing is, I wouldn't be surprised if we find a lot more updates come Australia, like way more than testing has been. So definitely probably considering doing a video like this for Australia practice, because I think there's going to be a lot of stuff to kind of pick out and show you guys from Australia practice. But that's going to be it. I'm going to now end the video because my voice is literally going. So yeah, if you guys have enjoyed the video, hit that like button. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. As I said in the middle of the video, if you are new around here, do get subscribed for weekly Formula 1 content. I've been aarava. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you guys next time.